Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so how did you become a journalist, and
Well,
why?
I mean, as the book says, I'm an accidental journalist. I wasn't supposed to be one, as you know.
Accidental
In,
journey.
in fact, I went to the UK to study mechanical engineering. So I got a degree in mechanical engineering, and that was back in the early 90s or in the late 80s, actually. And by the time I finished school, there was a big economic crisis in Jordan, and our currency was devaluated because we had a war.
Yeah.
And then I came back to Amman, and I was supposed to go and work in Saudi Arabia. And Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait a couple of days after I landed in Amman. And I had, at that time, I didn't have my certificate, I had no job, I had basically my future was destroyed. And by sheer chance, a friend of mine told me about this American TV network that are set up at Hotel Intercontinental Jordan, and they're hiring people, as fixers. And he said I can get a job there if I go there. So, next day at 7 a.m. I was there, and I met this woman called Susan Zelinsky, who's a very famous producer in the TV business. And she looked at me and she said, "Do you speak English?" I said, "Of course I speak English. I'm a graduate of a British university." I said, "Okay, we will hire you for a day. Just go with the crew now." And I had no idea what the crew is. I had no idea what the camera does. I had, just went out, and that day, we were supposed to go and film at one of the refugee camps here in Amman on the way to the airport. And so I show up, and with the crew, and the policeman looks at me and he said, "Do you have a permission?" And I said, "What is a permission?" He said, "I need a piece of paper that says you're allowed to film here." And I had no idea what that is. So anyway, I had to go and run back to the hotel and get that piece of paper, and went back, and they let us film. And that day, it was, the Prince Hassan of Jordan. He was accompanying some UN delegation to visit those refugee camps, and those camps were, basically of Asian workers who escaped Kuwait at that time,
Okay.
and they were going through Jordan to be repatriated in their countries.
Okay.
And what shocked me for the first time ever, to see real refugees. And as you know, I am, my parents are refugees. My parents
Right.
are twice refugees from Palestine in 1948 and 67. And my mother always spoke about refugees. Remember my mother, I'm sure, right?
Of course.
And she always told us about, them being refugees. But for us, we never saw it. We just heard those stories that we kind of like, they were just part of our whatever history. And for me, the shock was to see refugees firsthand and see what a refugee camp looked like. And it's sad. It is absolutely sad. And because, in a refugee camp, nobody is there willingly. Nobody just decides to become a refugee
Right.
and move into refugee camp. People
That's
are
not what
forced.
Pete Hegseth said. Come on, Amjad.
No, no, no. You have to, I mean, you really have to be forced to be a refugee, and it's just a
Right.
miserable life. And for me, that was kind of wake up call. Like, okay, this is what actually my parents had to go through, and it's sad. And then I went back to the hotel, and Susan asked the other crew, like, "How is this guy doing?" They said, "Oh, he's very good." So she looked at me and she said, "Okay, come back tomorrow." And I kept coming back for the next 33 years. And this is how I became a journalist. But this is, I was never meant to be one. Why did I stay? Because I liked it. It's a very interesting and a very addictive profession, if you want to call it a profession, because you're always at the center of things. You get to see things firsthand, and I think I was so privileged because I had what I call a front row seat to history. What the
Right.
things I have seen is just unparalleled, and there were lots of interesting times, and there were lots of very very sad times, and they get to see but the good, the bad, and the ugly in the human nature all over the world. Later, I started going to Iraq, to cover Iraq, and then I covered both Iraq wars, the 2000, the
You got to
1990.
meet Saddam.
I get to meet Saddam, and I'll tell you about that.
Yeah.
And I
You got
covered the
bombed.
Middle East. Excuse me?
You got bombed at the Rashid Hotel.
I got bombed. Okay, so what actually I was asked about, like, what is the moment that made me a journalist, and I think it was in 2000. Sorry, in 19. I'm getting so old, like I confuse decades now, not just years. In 1993, I was hold on. In 1990, okay, in 1993. We went to Iraq with our correspondent Bob Simon to cover the second anniversary of the Gulf War, which the Iraqis used to call the mother of all battles. I don't know if you remember that expression.
Okay.
And one day, I was just sitting in the hotel room at in Baghdad, and I was, my crew was out of the hotel, and I was just sitting there watching a speech from Saddam. I fell asleep, and while I was asleep, I wake up on a huge bang, and it turns out that the hotel was hit by an American cruise missile.
At this
Luckily,
point, the war's over.
This is
but
the
there's
second
ongoing.
anniversary.
anniversary of the Gulf War.
So there's
It's
some
January
ongoing
17th,
things.
1990. Yeah, because the war was never actually over.
Okay.
After the Gulf War in 1991, Iraq and the United States and the UN, they kept playing this cat and mouse game between the UN would accuse Iraq of not cooperating with the weapons inspectors, and they're hiding this, hiding that, and sometimes things evolve into a more like serious confrontation, and the Americans would throw a couple of few missiles into Baghdad, and then the Iraqis would change their mind, and it just kept going on. I mean, this kept going on all through the 90s. The war, and that was very convenient for both sides, unfortunately, because the Americans, the various American administrations, Bush, Clinton, and what have you after, were saying that we're containing Iraq, and that was part of our, us containing Saddam and controlling him. And the Iraqis and Saddam Hussein, their slogan was the mother of all battles is still continuing, it's not ending. And for them, it was very, very convenient way to tell the Iraqi people, like, your suffering is not us, it's the Americans who are doing this. Okay, and the war is not over. So, don't blame us that there's no food and there's no water and there's no electricity and so on. Blame the Americans, they are the one who are bombing Iraq. So that whole thing was actually it was some sort of a silly game that both parties played. And who paid the price? The Iraqi people.
Yeah.
So to go back to that story, so Saddam that day decided to give a speech to commemorate the mother of all battles. I was listening to the speech and I fell asleep, and then the missile hits the hotel, and then I was looked at myself and I was injured. Basically, my leg was full of blood, and so I was I was terrified. I mean, I was thought I was going to die, and I was alone. So I managed to get myself out of the room, and I took off my pants just to see what's happening with my leg. And I realized it was just I had a shrapnel in my left leg, and so I was asking people to help me, and then they told me I have to go downstairs. So I had to limp 8 floors down to the lobby of the Rashid Hotel, which was
Amjad,
totally.
let me interrupt you for 1 second, because what is it like to be bombed? Like, do you know it's coming? Is it chaos? Like, how does it feel to be bombed? Which is something we hear about.
I can tell you one thing. You don't know that you're going to get good. Nobody knows they're going to be. I mean, we knew that was something happening. There was tense atmosphere, but I was sleeping when the actual missile hit the hotel. I was sleeping.
Yeah.
I was waking up with a bang. Like with alarm clock. So, and what people don't see on television is the smell, because those missiles actually create a very nasty smell from the gunpowder or whatever, the gases. But we were lucky that the missile itself did not hit the actual hotel building; it actually hit the garden. Okay. What we were injured was from the flying glass, because all the glass exploded, into into inside, and the window itself actually. I was so lucky because I was sleeping under the windowsill, and the window flew over me. If I was sleeping like 1 meter away, I probably have been killed. And so yes, it is. You're not prepared for it. Because if you're prepared, you won't be there anyway. And but then they put me on this They told me to go downstairs. I went downstairs, and the hotel, the lobby was destroyed because the hotel, this is where most of the impact was. And then the whole fire system collapsed. So, there was water all over the floor and electricity cables and so on. It was just, it's a mess. And,
Yeah.
smoke and people running and scared. And it's just mayhem. And then they pushed me another floor down. So imagine, and it was January, so it was cold. So I was wearing a t-shirt, my underpants, and I managed to get a towel to wrap myself up. And I had one sock because I left my other sock up in the hotel. So I go, and then they put me in a some sort of a bus, like a minivan, that they said it was an ambulance, and they took me to the hospital. So I go to the hospital, to the ER hospital, and they looked at my wound and said, like, "You're fine, you'll be okay, don't worry." And I was like, anyway, so they stitched me up, and then I was like, nobody knew where I was, because I knew that the team will come back to the room and they'll see my blood all over the place, and like I was going to think I'm dead.
Yeah.
And there was no phone to call, and I was just begging people to try to call the hotel or call my crew at the press office, and nobody was listening to me. There's just chaos. And then they said, okay, now we'll send you back to the hotel. Then they put me in a wheelchair and they pushed me. And I realized I'm being pushed inside the main building, the hospital, rather than being pushed outside. Turns out that they took us, there were about 6 of us who were wounded from the hotel. They put us in this ward and they closed the door. They actually kind of looked us in.
Locked you
And
in. Yeah.
being at the doctors, like, need to get out, please. And nobody was listening. And then suddenly, some people walked in, doctors, and they were like terrified. So they literally threw us off the beds, changed the bed sheets, put new ones, and they put some sort of these reports on top of the beds. They wrapped up our wounds, in a much nicer way,
Yeah.
and things were happening. And suddenly the door opens, and then I could see flashlights and cameras, and you could see this mean-looking guy who I used to see standing behind Saddam Hussein when he gave speeches with this big mustache. And I said, "Oh no!" And then Saddam walks in. And okay, what do you say? Well, how do I feel? I was already bombed, like an hour before, injured. I thought I was going to die, and suddenly Saddam Hussein is standing right in front of you. And luckily, I had a couple of few minutes to think what to do because Saddam went to the first bed to talk to the first patient, and I was like number 2 or number 3 in the lineup. And then Saddam walks towards me, and I just didn't know what to do. And at that time, I knew everything I'm going to say is going to be recorded because they had all these cameras out.
Right.
And I decided to play the shocked victim of the war. And I thanked Saddam for his humanitarian visit to come and visit us. And I asked him to give me a kiss. So Saddam leans forward and actually kissed Saddam Hussein. And that was that. And then Saddam goes and, who are you? And some doctor said, this guy's from Jordan, and he's been giving us trouble because he wants to go home. And Saddam goes like, oh, no, all Jordanians, our brothers are welcome here, and you should listen to what the doctors say. And I was like, okay, I'm staying. And he walks away. And that was that. It was like maybe 1-2 minutes long, the whole encounter. But it was all recorded. And there was a picture of me with Saddam. And of course, Saddam leaves.
This was helpful, but also caused your career, I don't know, it was like a double-sided sword, right? Moving forward.
Well, it was actually that picture with Saddam became my kind of like carte blanche to work in Iraq. Mm-hmm. Why? Because the next day, my picture was all over the Iraqi newspapers, me and Saddam. Everybody knew who I was. And after that, every year, Saddam used to send me a gift on January 17th. I was on the gift list. So I used to get these gifts from Saddam. And, when you get a gift from Saddam, the gift goes from Saddam towards from the presidential palace to the Ministry of Information. And then they start looking for me. And then they all find this guy, Amjad. So if I'm not in Iraq, they send it to Amman. And then, people will call me and then you have a gift from the president and you have to go and receive it. And you have to sign the receipt. Why? Because they're afraid they have to prove to their superiors actually it has been delivered.
Yeah.
And but that gave me the status that I was some sort of an important person, okay, in Iraq, and I wasn't important at all. But but people in Iraq, and Iraq being a police state, par excellence, was a very good police state. People are afraid of each other, and they think that this guy is in front of the president. He gets a gift every year. Here's a picture of him with Saddam. So just leave him alone. Don't talk to him because he might cause us trouble.
Right.
And that allowed me that picture, which I used to save on my Palm Pilot at that time, to work in Iraq all through the 90s to till the end of the collapse of the regime, unquestioned. And that allowed me and CBS News and 60 Minutes to do the best stories in Iraq that nobody else was allowed to do because of that picture. Okay, because people were just afraid to talk to me because I thought I was important, and that wasn't important. So that is the beauty of
Of sleeping close to the glass so that it goes over you.
Over you.
Yeah.
I was there was a chapter of the book called about Swiss cheese, because those regimes, the totalitarian regimes and police states, they look very solid from the outside. People think that this, it's like an apple that's been rotten from the inside, and but they're just full of holes, because a police state actually shields the public from seeing what's inside, and you can, if you know exactly where the holes are, you can go through them and navigate yourself.
Did you get any criticism for the photo or for your appearance?
No. I mean, no.
There's nothing you could do.
Yeah, but you have to be careful, because you're getting a gift as a journalist. We're not supposed to get gifts from anybody.
From dictators, yeah.
Sure. But the gifts were not anything significantly material. They were more symbolic. Plus, in Iraq, you cannot not accept the gift. It will be thought of as an insult. So you had to take it. And the gifts were not that important. I mean, I got a couple of rugs and a couple of wall paintings, and at the end they used to send us sweets and dates and whatever.
Okay, so you're not a journalist, and then all of a sudden you're dropped into the 60 Minutes universe. And throughout the book, you're talking about all the great correspondents that you worked with.
Yes.
What was it like to work with them? And were you intimidated at first? How did you adjust to go from not a journalist to one of the best journalism outfits in the world?
Well, at the beginning, I was mostly working for the news department at CBS News. I was doing, the hard news section, doing for the evening news. Later, I started getting to doing, more and more 60 Minutes. And in fact, then I was only doing 60 Minutes. Yes, it is, I mean, I worked with the best of the best. I mean, I cannot complain. I worked with the late Bob Simon, who's one of the best journalists in the business. I worked with Ed Bradley, with Leslie Stoll, and these are great journalists. And one of the reasons, that made me publish the book, because I had to tell, the stories and how those people actually worked hard, and how they were serious about what they were doing, especially in these days when we're accused of being fake news and all of these things, and that's not far away from the truth. The truth is that we actually worked hard to cover the news. We went to really very bad, nasty places. We endured a lot of trouble just to try to get the truth out and show people what's happening in those places, and bring those stories out in public. So yeah, I mean, I cannot be more thankful for working with those people, and I cannot, I mean, I have the highest respect for most of them, not all of them.
Sure. All right, what do you think about the concept of a fixer? So there's a thing that kind of came around maybe when James and I were coming up, which was that the Americans parachute in. They don't know what they're doing. They rely on a local person to help them navigate a situation and get them out. But it seems like your connections with CBS and with 60 Minutes were very positive. But what do you think about just the concept of a fixer, people coming from another place, needing assistance?
Yes.
What was your experience with that?
Well, when I was hired, they called us fixers. which is
Yep.
like I didn't even know what fixer is.
Right.
And it turns out that as you just said, the most of those foreign journalists when they get parachuted in place, they need to hit the ground running basically. So they try to hire people to show them the way, to tell them what to do and what not to do, where to film, what not to film, how to get the permission, where to sleep, where to eat. So yes, and those people are called fixers in the business. Unfortunately, they are the unknown soldiers because once people leave, they usually they were left behind. And one day, one of my good friends from NPR that I was very friendly with, and asked me about this. I said, "Well, the difference between you and I is that you have the option to leave. We don't. So when people come and do all these things and they leave, we have to stay behind and sometimes bear the consequences, especially with the local authorities and so on. So we have to be careful. But the way I saw myself, because I'm Western educated, I lived in the West. I know how you American people think, and I know when you say something what it really means, and I know what the Arabs mean. I know when Saddam gives a speech and whatever he says, I know what it says and what he's trying to say. Like one day, we're sitting in a hotel room in Baghdad, and Saddam was giving a speech, and we had all these foreigners sitting, waiting for me to tell them what Saddam says. And like 15 minutes later, they asked me, "What did he say so far?" I said, "That was hello." So the first 15 minutes was just the hello of the Arabs, because they think that he's saying something important. He wasn't. He was just, saying all this nonsense. So you have to wait like maybe half an hour down the speech to start, understand what he says. So I was sitting in the middle, and what most of the time broke my heart is that how I could see that both parties were talking, over each other. Nobody understands what the other person is saying, and me sitting in the middle, it was just sad. It was sad. And
Yeah.
just to see the stupidity of both sides. I mean, I'm not saying of like
Talking
this guy
past
says
each
something
other.
and that guy understands something else, and it's nonsense. To go back to the fixers, so yes, the fixer does everything, and it's a very important job. In fact, there are lots of people who did like serious research about the role of fixers in the news business and so on, and how we get left behind. In fact, for years, CBS would never put even my name on the stories that I even did from
Yeah.
scratch, and because I was the hire, as they say. Although
Right.
I'm the one who did the stories and so on. Many of my colleagues started complaining that you cannot call us fixers; we're actually producers. So CBS issued an edict saying, you should not call these people fixers. They called us field producers or producers. And in fact, my last contract with CBS News said I was the senior Middle East producer. Okay, I mean, I had more experience than everybody else. I've been in the business
Sure.
for years. And so when I wrote the book had a different title. And in the last minute, I decided to call it The Fixer. And
Was
my
it called
boss,
Senior Field Producer? Was that the old title of the?
I was senior Middle East producer. That was my job title. And
I think this title is better, Amjad.
The Fixer is better, yeah. So
Yeah.
my boss, my ex-boss, calls me and said, "Amjad, why do you call yourself The Fixer? I thought you didn't like it." I said, "No, Andy. I never I never complained about being called The Fixer because I never wanted to be a producer myself because I was trying to be the best fixer in the business, which I was, okay. And why should I call myself something else? I was a fixer, and I'm very proud that I was one. Okay, and so now, even now, after the book was published, a lot of people like call me out, Mr. Fixer, and it's fine. I'm not. I'm very proud for that.
What was the story, or maybe a few stories that you had to stay behind and deal with the consequences of, where you had to do that fixer thing where you're still there and maybe people are mad at you for the story or somebody.
Too many to count. I mean, like till
Yeah.
now, I'm afraid, for example, to go to Egypt because a few years ago, CBS did an interview that President Sisi did not like. So I was, I'm afraid, and my name was part of the team that was working on the story. So now, I've been out of the business for 3, 4 years now, and when I go to Egypt and see if they're still angry. Some people said, "Oh no, they will forget." I said, "Oh, maybe not. You
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
you want to test it, and so on." Like we're working in Syria now. Like for Syria, I never went to Syria because I knew the moment they see my name at the border, they're going to bring me in for questioning. So
Right.
yeah, and also being an Arab. Uh, you know you don't get the protection that we used to get as the foreigners, like
Yeah.
I remember one one day we were in Qatar, and we were supposed to go there and interview the previous Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Hamad. And at 1 a.m. In the morning, I get a phone call, and I was asked to come into the Ministry of Information of Foreign Affairs alone. They said, come alone. So I go there and they sit me down. And the Gulf countries is typical to do business at midnight because of the heat. So
Okay.
they said, okay, we have to tell you one thing. I said, what? They said, the Amir changed his mind. He doesn't want to do the interview now. They want to postpone it. And he said, you go and tell them that. I said, why? He said, because you are an Arab and you understand. I said, well, you speak English. I mean, I speak, you can go and tell them that, the interview has been postponed. And this is the time when we had, a whole 60-minute crew in town that we flew like, 10 people to Doha to do the interview. But they want me because you are an Arab, you understand. Like, you go and tell them. It's like,
Right.
I don't understand why the Emir decided to change his mind. Yes, I do
Yeah.
understand, in fact, but there's nothing you can do about it. And
Right.
then I had to go back to the hotel and bring the crew and to make them understand that, that the Emir decided to postpone the interview. Sorry, I'm a bit sick. Okay. Yes. So yes, sometimes I have to stay behind. And one of the things I didn't really do through my career, I didn't do stories about Jordan, for example, because I
Sure.
Yeah.
live in Jordan. I don't want to get in trouble with the government here. Okay,
Right.
so I try to avoid doing stories here about Jordan because I was doing stories somewhere else, and in Iraq, all the Gulf, the Yemen, and so on. But Jordan, I didn't want because I live in Jordan. And
Right.
if you do something that the authorities here don't like, I'm the one that they're in front of them.
Right.
So and so like, but one day, I was called in by my boss at 60 Minutes, and he asked me, he said, Amjad, how come you've been able to work for us for that long, without getting into trouble? Because I am, kind of Jordanian, Christian. I don't belong to anybody. I'm not a Shiite or a Sunni or anything like that. And he said, how come you managed to work in all these places without getting into trouble? And then he went quiet and he said, well, I know why, because you have no team to bat for. And I said, yes, I don't have a team to bat for. And that was that because, didn't belong to anybody. I have no political views. I'm not part of any tribe or any religious sect or anything. So nobody ever accused me of being biased towards anybody. So
Yeah.
that's,
It's yeah, I mean you end up being in the perfect place to be a fixer. Your whole
yes,
history getting you
Right.
there.
In the middle of everything, figuratively and literally.
yes.
All right, Amjad, what is the story you're most proud of? I was going to suggest curveball, but I'll let you decide. What is the big story that you produced or that you fixed?
Well, the book, as you know, is full of little stories of anecdotes that I have witnessed over, for more than 30 years. And there are a lot of small stories and big stories and, mega stories. And what is the proud of? I mean, the curveball story we'll talk about, but, there are a lot of stories about people.
Yeah.
And this is basically what I always thought my duty was. Hold on. So I always thought for my mission. Well, I don't want to call it mission. The thing I should do is
Yeah.
give voice to the people on the street, to the man on the street that is rarely heard, because most politicians and players in this region, they have a huge amount of money and lots of resources, and a lot of PR agencies and strategic consultants, whatever they call them, to tell them what to say or what not to say, or what to do or what not to do. Meanwhile, the man on the street who ends up paying the price for most of the mistakes or events that happen in this region have no voice, and you rarely hear people talking. I mean, look what's happening now in Iran. Did you hear any Iranian people, anybody in Iran complaining? No. Okay, although they claim that the Iranian people are against the regime, I haven't heard anybody from Iran saying a word. Okay, not that, and not that, I don't know. I missed anything because I watch the news still, and it's sad. Like even in Iraq, when we covered Iraq during Saddam days, Iraqi mothers, they have children, and they don't want their children to go to war and die, you know, but nobody was allowed to say that. In
Yeah.
fact, the only people that we were allowed to interview were the people who were screaming and yelling and shouting that we're going to kill the Americans and do this and do that. And that was not representing the Iraqi people. Iraqi mothers are just as afraid about their children as any American mother would do. Nobody wants to send their children to war. Okay. And so this is, I always try to get those people on television, because those people have no way to get on television except if we help them to do so. Meanwhile, the big players, they can do press conferences and statements and whatever. So yes, so there are lots of interesting stories in the book. Curveball is definitely stands out as one of the most kind of thrillers because it's a story about me trying to find this Iraqi defector who basically told the Americans back in 1998, 99, that Saddam has a factory in southern Baghdad producing weapons of mass destruction. And it was his testimony that at that time Colin Powell used at the UN to justify the case for war in Iraq in 2003. I don't know if you remember that incident when they produced those pictures of the mobile trucks. And this guy, I spent 4 years of my life trying to find him, chasing him over more than 7 countries to find him at the end, by chance, by accident, in Germany. And I went and interviewed him. And we managed to get him on television at the end. And we told the story about this guy who's obviously a pathological liar, managed to deceive his German hosts and, by extension, the Americans. And then he took the whole country, the whole world to this war.
He told them what they wanted to hear.
He told them, I don't want to defend anybody. He told them a very plausible story. Okay. That kind of made sense. Having said that, there are so many other people who told them otherwise. Even the spies that the CIA and the Americans had working for them told them that there were no weapons of mass destruction. There were no weapons. And they decided to believe one guy that they didn't even meet, okay, from Germany, who told them a plausible story about the weapons that they used to justify the war. In fact, those pictures, the drawings of the mobile units that they claimed that Saddam was using to produce biological weapons, he did them. In fact, they gave him, the Germans gave him the drawing sets to do it. So, and the better stories he told them, his condition improved, because the first time when the Germans found him in Germany, he was in a refugee camp, one of these holding camps for refugees, sharing a room with like 12 people. Okay. And then when they asked him, who are you? He said, I'm a chemical engineer working in Iraq, and I used to work in a factory that produced biological weapons. They said, oh, interesting. So they moved him from this room with 12 people to a private room with a bathroom. So he realized the more stories he tell them, okay, the better stories, his condition would improve. And I said, I asked him, I said, like, did you play them? He said, well, I played them and they played me too. Because, the more stories they told them, and then they brought him this drawing set to do these things, and he started giving them more details. Most of them were true, by the way, except the fact that the factory itself was not producing.
The one important point.
Well, there was one missing, and they could have checked,
They were
but
making seeds, right? Or they were doing something
there
with
was a
farming.
seed purification plant, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. But the people working on the seed purification plants were the nuclear scientists of Iraq. So, and it was like, why all these nuclear scientists in Iraq working in this factory producing seeds? It didn't make sense. What made sense, his story actually made a lot of sense.
Right.
But, when I met him many years later, it took me 5 minutes to realize that this guy is full of shit, basically.
Yeah.
Bullshit, that he's a pathological liar. And
Yeah.
why did he do it? Because for he claimed that he did it because he wanted to get rid of Saddam, which is a big lie, because he thought that they can give him like some sort of a green card or residency in Germany, and that's it. That was that, and and also his sense of importance and so on. In fact, when I met him, uh, I met him in a town in the south of Germany, and he told me, "I want to ask you a question." I said, "Well, I am the one who should be asking question, not you. I'm the journalist." He said, "No, no, no. I want to ask you a question first." And he said, "Do you think I'm an important man?" Imagine. I looked at him and said, "Well, Rafid, you are some sort of an important man because you caused the war. But my friends in Amman told me to spit in your face." And I told him that and he said, "No, you don't understand. I'm an honorable person and so on." And he's none of that. He's just somebody, a very weak person who is just a liar. But sadly enough, he managed to come up with this story that is plausible. Okay, again, he told them a story that they wanted to believe. Yes, true.
Yeah.
Who to blame? There's blame that goes all around. So that's one of the interesting stories I have done. The other story that I kind of like is my encounter with Osama bin Laden's bodyguard in Yemen, a guy called Nasser al-Bahri, Abu Jandal. And this guy I found in Yemen by absolute chance. And it turns out that he was the personal bodyguard of Osama bin Laden. And he has the most interesting story of all times. And we kind of became friends because every time I used to go to Yemen, I used to go and hang out with him, and he would tell me the most interesting stories. And he used to love to go to Kentucky Fried Chicken. So we used to go to KFC and we would sit there and he would have chicken and tell me all sorts of stories. And okay, many of my friends, especially you American guys, blame me like, how can you talk to this guy because he's a terrorist and so on. Yeah, okay, I can see that. But he wasn't involved in 9/11 because when 9/11 happened, he was actually in Yemeni jail. And it was for the first time that we have managed to put on television on 60 Minutes a terrorist who actually speaks, because most of the terrorists that we are on television are usually people who are holding guns and yelling in a foreign language that you don't understand, and you think that they are just crazy. And this guy actually took us to his house, and we met his wife and children, and we saw him as a father and as a human. And we put a human face to a terrorist.
Yeah.
And in fact, if this guy was born in a different country at a different time, he'll probably be a bank manager in New York or a teacher in Sweden or whatever. But he was, brought in a very unfortunate atmosphere, and his only way forward was to join some sort of a group that ended up becoming Al Qaeda, that got evolved into whatever we could see. And did he do it by choice? I don't know, but it's just circumstances. But he definitely has the most interesting stories you can think of, and they're all in the book.
So James and I were talking last week about how the coverage of the Iran war here in the States is almost, it exists, but there are not very many correspondents anywhere that close. We're not hearing from Iranians very much. There's a guy in Tel Aviv and he's watching the occasional rocket fall, but there's really not much. So I want to ask you about what has happened to journalism in general, maybe in the last 15 years. And then if you want to talk about CBS and 60 Minutes, but like, where
Well,
is
these are
journalism headed?
too many questions. We have to break them down one by one.
Let's do
Okay.
it.
Well, I mean, the war with Iran. I mean, the Americans claim that they hit more than 3,000 targets so far in Iran, and we hardly seen any. We saw the school, okay,
Yep.
where the Iranians say that there are 170 girls that were killed, and it's what is sad now because some people in the U.S. administration would dismiss that as propaganda and so on, and this is exactly the same thing that used to happen in Iraq. Okay, how do you cover these civilian casualties, because nobody's there, and there are no correspondents there, and usually you have to rely on either what the Americans are saying or on what the Iranian government are saying, and it's very easy to dismiss the Iranian point of view as being propaganda or whatever. And it happened in Iraq before, and it would take years after that for real journalists to go back in and find the victims and understand what really happened and how many people died. And then then it also becomes a numbers game, like, oh no, this wasn't 170, it was 140, or no, 150, as if like 150 girls or 170 girls or 10 girls dead.
Makes a difference, right?
It
Yeah.
makes a difference. It's still there, too many girls dead,
Right.
and it's absolutely sad. It is just sad. I mean, I'm watching the whole thing, and now we have all these grainy videos of targets being blown up,
Right.
and it's the same thing we saw in the Gulf War. I mean, there's nothing new about this, and unfortunately, in the end, the truth will come out years later, and we would see the human cost of suffering of what happened. So it is just absolutely sad. Now, okay, what's happening with the coverage? Of course, the coverage has changed because now you have 24-hour coverage, and now you have, on top of that, the social media and Instagram and Facebook and what have you, and added to that, now you have AI and all these fake images that people
Right.
can generate easily,
Yeah.
and the audience get absolutely lost in this
Lost.
massive amount of information. Plus, the fact that with all these changes that are happening in the U.S. media now, it is so sad to see what is going on. I always, I left this business in 3 years ago, and you know what? I couldn't have been more thankful for leaving it, because I cannot see myself working under those circumstances, whether for CBS News or somebody else. And I always look at my colleagues who are left behind. I told them the other day, I see you like as the band on the Titanic. It is just see this, really respectable news organization, having to bow to pressure and cover the
Right.
news in a very, I don't know, don't want to be judgmental, but
Right.
different way.
Different
And it's sad. It is absolutely sad because I mean, I worked with the best people in the news business, and I saw how we did it. I saw what it took to do news. I was part of the team that did the Abu Ghraib story in Iraq. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yeah. Sure.
And that was what the media is supposed to do. CBS
Right.
News at that time, 60 Minutes, Dan Rather, actually, they broke it. One of the most important stories in American news business, probably more important than Watergate, about the abuse in Abu Ghraib.
Right.
And sometimes, I look at what we have done. In fact, after Abu Ghraib, Al Qaeda and all the ISIS people used to put the prisoners in orange jumpsuits,
Right.
seeing what was happening in Abu Ghraib. Okay, and
Oh, interesting.
unfortunately, many people in the Arab world do not understand that it was an American news organization. It was 60 Minutes that broke the story, and this is what the media's job is about to do: is to hold people in power to responsibility. That you cannot do. You cannot go do things unchecked, even
Right.
in a state of war. Okay, and I think Abu Ghraib, the story was so damaging to the American reputation all over the world that America is probably still suffering from now. And sometimes, we regret it, but no, this is our duty. Somebody has to do it. Somebody has to hold people accountable. And unfortunately, now you see this is happening less and less and less.
Right.
and journalists are being accused of being biased and fake news and whatever, and that's not true. That is not true. And this was one of the reasons I actually, in the last few months, I sat down and spent like 3 months working nonstop to finish the book and put it together, just to prove, like, no, guys, we actually did very important part, of the work, that we had to do it.
When I think back to when I was learning Arabic, which was during the Arab Spring, and then I come to Jordan working for you and for Syria Direct, there was so much maybe optimism at first, and now I would say a significantly less amount of optimism, right? And journalism was this powerful thing. Twitter was going to overthrow the oppressive regimes. Everything's kind of changed so much.
The problem is that definitely the revolution in Egypt was caused by Facebook. It was called the Facebook Revolution. Definitely.
Right.
And we did a story about, I don't know if you remember, Warid Ghanem, the Facebook executive, who they created this group, and that was part of that created this whole core team of these activists who worked together, not knowing each other, by the way, except through their social media profiles. And at the end, the whole thing, got so massive that actually they managed to organize this massive revolution that brought down the Egyptian government.
Right.
And but unfortunately, the governments are more powerful and more resilient than the individuals, because they have the time and they have the resources. And with time, they manage to figure out how to do it. And how to do it is by basically counting them with, if you tweet once, those people are can tweet 100 times. If you tweet 100 times, they can tweet 1,000 times. And and they managed to shoot them down in a way by just flooding the cyberspace with so many contradicting information. That was very evident also during the Syrian civil war. Basically, I don't know if you remember, at the beginning of the Syrian civil war, there was a chemical attack on a town called Khan Sheikhoun in northern Syria. And when the thing happened, the Syrian government said the story is not right. There was no attack. Okay, those people are actors. Okay, and then they managed to send out 6 different stories. Okay, one of them could be true, because the 6 together cannot be true. It's either one of the 6 is true. So for the casual observer, you have 6 options of truth. That you can pick one, and the truth itself got lost in the middle. Okay, so, and also there was another story we did about the white helmets. I don't know if you remember the white helmets. These were the first responders during the Civil War. Okay, the white helmets were a bunch of activists affiliated with the opposition, and their job was to go and save people from bombed out buildings after they get bombed by the Syrian regime, by the Assad regime. And what happened was, those people managed to get a lot of funding from the Western countries, because most of those countries, especially the European ones, felt so useless during the revolution. They couldn't do anything. So the only way they had some money, and they used to give it to these organizations to do things. So White Helmets got a lot of funding from foreign governments to do stuff, to buy equipment and so on. And they get them media training. And part of media training was to give them GoPros and teach them how to film their, the rescue missions.
First person,
So at the beginning, those people used to film with these phones, and then with these shaky and grainy videos. And then when the White Helmets managed to get their act together, and they got better in presenting their work, they were very much attacked for being that these things were filmed in Hollywood, because they look good.
Right.
And the regime used that against them, okay, because the videos look better now. Okay, it means that they were done in Hollywood rather than being a real thing. So yes, the regimes with time, all of them, managed to use the social media at the end to their advantage. So they took the edge out of this activist who at the beginning used it to their advantage. Unfortunately, but also you don't forget that also the social media and those activists created havoc as well, because
Right.
many of them just didn't understand the basis of news coverage, and they're just most of them were just cowboys basically. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know, I want to insult anybody, but they were not professional journalists, and they created a lot of havoc. Even now, like I follow news on Instagram, and you get like, oh, a missile falls, I don't know where, and then when you click, you realize that this is from 3 days ago. It's not
Right.
like there is no context in the coverage, which
Right.
still the serious news organization keep the context. And many people don't even understand what the byline is and the dateline. Okay,
Right.
like I always tell people, just check the dateline, see who wrote the article. Don't just forward it or retweet it, because sometimes this is just nonsense. Okay, and see who wrote it. Oh, and then they'll see like a German expert. Like, who is this German expert? Why isn't
Right.
he? Why doesn't he have a name? Okay, or something.
Yeah.
So it's sad. It's sad. I'm like, now for me, I'm more an observer to what's
Yeah.
happening.
So it's 2014. I show up in your kitchen. But now it's 2026. What advice would you give to somebody who still thinks journalism can possibly be a force for good? What advice, if it's a Jordanian kid who you meet who wants to be a Middle East producer, if it's a gringo like me who shows up, what advice would you give?
Journalism is a force for good. It still is. The mission did not change. What changed are the methods.
Yeah.
And the mission is one thing: just tell the truth. Okay, don't try to stay away from editorializing, as we say in Arabic, in English. And when I wrote the book, this is what I tried to avoid. Okay, giving my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, I told the stories as I saw them. And in fact, in my book, there are 3 chapters about Saudi Arabia and all the work we did in Saudi Arabia, post 9/11, and afterwards, towards even, when Mohammed bin Salman came to power. And a Saudi friend of mine kept calling me and saying, Amjad, we said read the book, we don't see the book. And I was terrified of them reading the book, because I
Yeah.
thought they're not going to like it. Because basically, I just described things the way I saw them.
Right.
Eventually, I sent him a draft. I said, okay, here's a draft. You read it and just tell me what you think. And you know what was the reaction was? Oh, we love it. Why? Because it is what it is. Because I did not give my opinion. I did not give people names or titles or anything. I just told people what I saw, and nobody can dispute that. Now, okay, if you agree of what happened or not, that's not my responsibility. I'm telling you what I
Right.
saw. You know,
Yeah.
and you can make your opinion. I am not going to force you to make your opinion or to make an opinion for you. But unfortunately, many people, they love to have people who give them opinions, because that makes them feel comfortable that they don't have to make their own judgment. They can always blame somebody else for giving them that. And I
Right.
think journalists should not do that. I think as journalists, we should be just as transparent as we could. Just tell what we see and let people make their opinions. We are not historians. We are not politicians. We are not opinion makers. We are just bearers of information. In
Yep.
fact, there was a very important book written by the Arab world by professor called Eugene Rogan called The Arabs.
Yeah.
And one of the chapters that he wrote about Syria in the late 1800s, his book was based on the notes that were written by a barber in Damascus. And that barber in Damascus used to go home every night after he finishes the work in his shop, and he would write down what people are saying in the barber shop. Okay, and he used the notes of the barber to write the history of Damascus at that era. And when I met Professor Rogan, I told him I am the barber, because I just wrote what I saw. You historians, you come and make sense of it all.
Interpret. Yeah.
That's not my job, because I always think that journalism is because the first draft of history. My book is a second draft of history. We just put it all together, but I am not going to make the judgment. Let somebody else make the judgment. But what I hope when people read the book, they would understand and realize what was going on from very close up point. Because unfortunately, most of the books that are written about us Arabs are written by foreigners, and there's people
Right.
who come in. They have this 30,000 foot view of the region. They have their own understandings. Some of them are right,
Right.
some of them are wrong, and they write it in what they call an Orientalist way.
Right.
I tried not to be, I tried to write it from somebody who is in the region, who saw what's happening, and let people, judge for themselves. And it's not an easy job. The next book I'm going to write is going to be fiction because it's
Oh,
easy.
good.
because because this book I had to to check
The
every day.
Barber of Amman is coming. That's going to be good.
No, I'm joking. But writing fiction is so easy. This
Yeah.
one is like I have to check every single word, every single date, every single
Right.
name, how you spell that name. And now with AI coming in, that even creates more problems.
Yeah.
And it's just, but also I always tell my friends now, because I ran my book on a couple of AI platforms to check the consistency of the grammar and of
Sure.
the tenses and of the dates and so on. And now, if you go on Claude or on ChatGPT and ask questions that are related to things that are happening in the book, actually, you will get quotes from my book.
Oh, good.
Okay,
You're
and
training
that
the
is
data.
important because because basically ChatGPT and all these AI platforms, they don't make up information. They find it somewhere else and they just put it together. And
Right.
if we Arabs or people in the region do not write our own history,
Right.
somebody is going to write it for us, and then we are not going to like it. Okay, so we better people like me who have seen stuff. Again, it's not a duty, but it's better for us to document these things because these will be used in the future as again as the first draft of history, and this is what the future generations would learn. If we don't do it, somebody else would do it, and then we're going to start blaming others for being biased and
Right.
accuse people of whatever. In fact, if we don't do it, we lose.
Yeah.
So,
Jimbo, you got any other questions for Amjad?
That's interesting about data sets for AI. Uh,
Yeah, you wonder if it's training on Arabic and if it crosses over languages. I don't know how any of that works.
yeah.
it does. I mean, definitely. I mean, I'm telling you from experience because we ran it on Claude and we ran it on ChatGPT.
Okay.
And if you go on Claude now, you can ask questions about like curveball, about somebody or whatever, and it will use part of the information from my book.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right.
No,
Well,
I think you
yeah.
answered the question. Yeah, the question is, to what extent does it still matter? It's hard to be optimistic in 2026 that finding the truth and telling it makes a difference, because a lot of the times now it seems like it doesn't, but somebody's gonna still do it.
Well, somebody somebody has to do it. As you know, guys, Keenan, more or less. I mean, I used to, I had a very interesting career over 33 years. I used to go out and every time I come back to Amman and, we sit in the kitchen, have coffee, and I tell people stories. And like, and everybody used to tell me, you have to write those stories down. You cannot just leave them to yourself. Because, I'm a storyteller, you know that. I mean, I used to go and, hold court and people would just sit and listen
Of
to these
course.
crazy stories and then they leave. And then many years ago, my friend Amy told me we should do it. We should write them down. And I said, I can't write, whatever. And but I did. We played a tape recorder, and Amy started recording those stories. And then at some point, the tape recorder didn't work, and so on. And we abandoned the project many years ago. Many years later, after we left Keenan, we had this guy who came to work at Sierra Direct called Andrew Brown. I don't know if you know him.
I don't.
And Andrew Brown was another American who came to the Middle East, like you guys, wanted to
Sure.
understand who we are and what we do and so on. And Andrew told me, you have to write the stories. I said, I don't know how to do it. I mean, I failed my O level in English many years ago. And he said, I will help you. So we sat in a cafe in Abdul and we wrote like an outline of the book. And
Yeah.
we wrote it on Google Documents.
Yeah.
And, I shared it with Andrew and I started to write. And Andrew would come in and put all these questions on the side in the notes, like, "What do you mean by this? Who is that? Is this what is not clear? Can you clarify this?" So
Yeah.
I ended up writing the book for Andrew. And who is Andrew? Andrew is just an American young man who is interested in journalism in the Middle East. I mean, like you guys.
Yeah.
And it was very crucial in getting the book together. Why? Because, like, I could control the level of details I have to add in the book to make the story understandable. Like,
Right.
when you talk about somebody like Saddam Hussein, for example, you can write the whole book about Saddam Hussein. But
Right.
you have to explain enough information for the reader to understand who Saddam Hussein is and where he came from without boring them to death with all these details. So Andrew was very, very crucial in that, and God bless him, he stayed on to the end, and he was a great help in getting this book together. And when we finished, my friend Hassan Fattah, who's an American Iraqi, I sent him the book. I said, "Hassan, can you please just check the book and read it?" And Hassan calls me back and goes, "Amjad, this is great, so good, I love it, but I can make it 10 times better." I said, "Hassan, I just spent a lot of money proofreading this book, and if you start fiddling with it, we have to do it again." He
Right.
said, trust me." And Hassan is a graduate of Columbia School of Journalism. And they looked at it, and he changed the structure of the book, the story arc, and he divided it into 3 parts. So part 1 is called the making of the fixer, how I
Fix it,
became.
yeah.
Part 2 is the Iraq War, and part 3 is the aftermath. And he said this is the Star Wars trilogy. And he changed the arc of the book. But after he did that, we had to jump in the chapters around.
Yeah.
But of course, then we had to proofread it again and make sure it was all done all over again.
Right.
And it reads much better. And we did a lot of what's called character development. So it is, I mean, listen, I had so much fun doing it. And after I finished, I was like, "Oh, and now what?"
Yeah.
And
How many years? How long was the full process?
well, I mean, I would say it took about 6 years from start to finish. But
Okay.
there was a huge gaps in the middle because at some
Sure.
point I just lost interest and I said, "This is useless, and nobody is going to read this." And so I stopped and came back and stopped and came back. But at the end, it took me about 4 months of me waking up every morning at 4 a.m. and going to bed at 12, sitting behind my computer screen, and we went every single word of it. And what was very useful as well, what we did after I finished each chapter, I would turn it into an audio file, and now it's easy with the AI. And I
Yeah.
would listen to those chapters. And when you sit there and you listen to that, it makes it, you can see if there's something wrong, and you can see the gaps and the sentences that are half finished and so on. So we did that, and we use another software that compares the grammar and compares the, called AutoCrate, which is a very, very, very good writing tool. So we did use AI to fix it, but not to write it. And there was something also very interesting. And then suddenly, when the book was, we started putting all the stories together, there were little gaps here and there. And so what we did, there was something that's funny. Between 1998 and 2006, I was in charge of doing the CBS News expenses in Iraq. And during all those years, I spent $24 million of Seventh Circle. You've probably seen them, Keenan. They were orange boxes.
Yeah.
And these were very, very critical when when I sat down to write the book, to find the exact dates, because the thing with every story we did had a budget number and the date and receipts, and the receipts, they have very specific dates, so I could know on which day, at which restaurant we ate that meal and who paid for what and who was at the meal. And this is very, very critical when we got all the dates right, because many people ask me, "How do you remember all these details?" And well, I remember a lot, but many of them came also from the expense sheets, because we managed to put all these little stories together. And so, I mean, I hope that you liked it. I mean, did you read it, James, or just?
I'm about halfway through. I started it last night.
Well, it's a long book, but it's also full of little stories, so you don't have to read them all together, and
Mhm.
you can
That's
jump back and forth, and it's
when you discuss how he left questions next to every story. You don't need to know Middle Eastern history to read the book. I mean, every
No.
story is its own little like fun, usually kind of funny or kind of entertaining, and then the characters pop in, and there's usually plenty of context. So you could learn about Middle Eastern history, but you don't have to. The book just takes you through it, and yeah, I thought it was great. I was really impressed.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's
Page-
a lot of work.
It's a page turner. It's a page turner
It
for
is
sure.
a page turner, yes. It was meant to be like that. It was meant to be funny, but it's also very sad.
Right.
And my niece, my 6-year-old niece, asked me the other day because I was working on the book and she was trying to help me, with things. And she was like, and she asked me like, Uncle, what is this your book is about? And it took me a few seconds to reply, and I said, it's about war, because war is very hard to describe. In fact, the first line of the book is
The quote, the opening, from
opening
Zuhair,
quote
the Jahoit, I forget his name.
Jahiliya poet from Suhaib ibn Abi Salma that says war is something that you have never seen or tasted, and no words can explain it. And so I try to explain what war is in this book. And unfortunately, we're seeing another one now as we speak. I mean, yesterday the Rashid Hotel was bombed. Did you know
saw
that?
Yeah.
And this is for the third time in its history. It's one of the few hotels in the world that can be, claim that,
3 times bombed. The Hanoi Hilton and the Rashid Hotel, I think. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think mine was the first one. I think there were a couple of incidents before, and yesterday was the fourth probably. And it's and when I saw that, I was like, my book is still relevant, and I hope it will be. I don't want to be relevant for much longer, but it seems that it's going to stay as it is.
I think so. Yeah. I think a few people in our government should read it. I just don't
I
know if we
hope
have a lot of readers in our government, but yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. Amjad, you have to send me. I can make you a nice leather one if you want. I could do it with this one, or if you want to send me the text, I could print it out and make it nice. So
I can send you a PDF file.
Yeah. Send me the PDF, and I'll make one for you and send
He's
it out to you.
Keenan's got lots of fancy equipment over there in New York now.
We can do it. Yeah, I'll get you a nice.
Well,
leather.
now that the book was published, we found a few errors in it. I mean, there's just typos that
It happens. Yeah.
There's the paragraph that's repeated.
Yeah, it's I
even because I'm self-published. I did the layout myself. I had to learn typography and
So much
layout, and I did it myself. I didn't hire anyone to do it.
very
I got
impressed.
the pictures and so on.
Yeah,
So
it's great.
yeah.
Well, good. All right. Well, Amjad, it was great talking to you.
Always.
Yes. Stay safe. I'll text you, and we'll see if we can get that PDF. I want to make that for you.
Okay. And how can we see this video?
Oh, okay. So I'll upload it probably tomorrow, and then is it all right? I'm going to put some clips on social media. I'll chop it up into little clips.
Please, and on
I'll send them
Instagram,
to
we
you
are
too.
the Fixer book. You can tag us
Yeah. Okay. Great. I'll tag you. Sounds good.
with the Fixer book on Instagram.
Sounds good. I will.
All right. Very good.
All right. Good
Thank you
talking
very
to
much,
you,
guys.
Amjad.
Hey, Amjad.
See you later.
See you.
Bye.